5, 4, 3, 2.
Yugi Bros! So let's talk Banlist, and I don't mean the joke that I made back on April 1st where I faked that Konami dropped a ban list. No, let's make our own ban list. So Konami recently dropped a survey talking about whether or not we feel the need that this version of the game needs either a ban list, a Duel Links ban list, or just no ban list and keep it how it is. And while I could definitely probably make the argument that the game probably could just stay the way it is as of right now, I decided to take the extra step and make a ban list that I think doesn't destroy anything by any means, except maybe a skill or two here or there, but puts a few things in check that maybe otherwise kept it what they are currently, kinda, drive us into the same old. Plus, unless we get a Speed Duel product before the end of the year, we're just stuck in the same format, guys. So let's dive into what I have for a ban list for Speed Duels. And I obviously took the web page and I made a few edits, as you can see here. Speed Duel Forbidden Limited List, effective from August 1st, 2021. Updated as of today, as of recording this video. I put August 1st because, Speed Duel's never had a list before, so usually you don't need more than a few days to prep for a new ban list, and most people will play a new ban list even before it drops officially, just because what's the point of playing old format, But also, August 1st gives us a little bit more time, since we've never had a list in Speed Duels, and makes it even with my no sooner than date, which I'll come up to in a second. Now, for the original bullet points, I have it the same as always. The forbidden means nothing in your main side and extra. 1 copy is 1 everywhere, 2 is 2 everywhere, but I added this extra bullet point that says all field spell skills and continuous spell trap skills are no longer played on the field and instead remain outside the game like other skills, example, Union Combination. So, not so much with the Battle City box, but with skills before this, field spell skills and continuous spell and trap skills like Toon World and Heavy Metal Raiders, for example, would actually start where they were supposed to be, either in the spell trap zone as a continuous card or in the field spell zone. And you also started with some of them, like Heavy Metal Raiders, for example, with 1 less card in your hand. I've decided to change this to where they're actually outside the game like Union Combination, but I didn't change the hand thing. So if you're starting with Heavy Metal Raiders, for example, and you get 1 less card, the fact that it stays in the game for the entire duel probably justifies the 1 less card starting hand thing. And I know in my Let's Errata Some Skills videos, I said we should get rid of the start with 1 less card thing, but let's just make this easy for everyone for now. We don't change any of the cards. We don't have to rewrite anything. We could reprint these later without saying they start in the respective zones that they start in. But you could technically play these now, and as long as you know they stay outside the game, you're just fine how it is. So, moving on down here, I have the next update will be no sooner than January 1st, 2022, and that's mainly because we don't have any other products, I don't think, scheduled, and if we do get something announced before the end of the year, usually you don't want to drop a ban list around the time of a new release. You kind of want to see where the format shapes out to be, even if something from, back in the day ends up making something good out of the new stuff. You kind of want to let it ride, see people figure it out before you want to start ban hammering things for no reason. So, let's get into this list, shall we? For newly banned, I have a skill that everyone wants banned, and that is Inner Conflict. Now, I could make the argument that I think this card is probably okay to stay in the game, but when you're allowed to pay half your life points, which is always, to take control of any monster on your opponent's field, doesn't target, skills don't start chains, so they're not stopping this, you're taking a monster for free, and you can only not attack directly with it, so you can still attack something else or do what everyone does with the card, and that is tribute the monster. Not only have you just netted yourself free spot removal by the cost of half your life, which is nothing usually in most games because it's always live, and then also are able to summon something of bigger relevance to your field, or at the very least swing with the monster you took for game usually. That's kind of insane, guys. If this skill had an errata to where either you don't get a battle phase or you can't tribute the monster you take, yeah, it's probably okay at that point. But in the same breath, we're going off the idea that they're not going to errata text boxes, so to speak. By that logic, I think this is still a little too good in the game, so let's knock it out for now. The other skill I have on here is Twisted Personality, and that is because without conflict in the game, it becomes a probably Union Combination versus Cocoon versus Twisted Personality game. However, between both Union Combination and Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, eventually there will be other decks/skills that outpower creep those. Twisted Personality, on the other hand, is a card that will always be good because damage is essential to the game. That's how you win the game, in most cases. So damage will always be a thing, and burn cards will always be a thing. Like, you can't hit one burn card and make Twisted Personality justified. It will always be a problem. Therefore, why not deal with the problem now rather than wait? Originally, I didn't have it banned on this list and I only had Conflict, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized this card probably will just always be a problem inherently, and I would like to see other skills eventually take the mantle as being quote-unquote the best skills. I don't want to always see this in the game as well, so let's just drop it for now. If we feel like it doesn't necessarily need to be hit, and we should bring it back, then wait 4 months and bring it back. But originally I made an entirely separate ban list video and this wasn't on it, and as I was justifying everything else on this list, I went through and realized this probably needs to go as well. So that's what I have for bans. On to newly limited. Starting off with Night Assailant. Night Assailant, while it's probably not a problem that necessarily needs to be dealt with now, it's definitely a problem that in the future could be a huge big deal. And that is because if you have one in your grave and you have one in your hand and you discard the one in your hand, you can add the one in your grave to your hand, essentially creating an infinite loop of discard/adds. And right now, the only time this gets actually seen at all is in XYZs, where XYZ Dragon Cannon can discard it, target a card in the field, destroy it, and then Night Assailant adds the other Night Assailant to your hand, and because XYZ Dragon is not once per turn, you can effectively keep discarding and adding and looping and destroying your opponent's entire board. And that's kind of not okay. Yes, a lot of people don't actually play the Night Assailant package in the XYZ deck anymore, and yes, the people that do most of the time side it, but better to nip it in the bud now rather than let it go for much longer and have other decks also abuse it as well. This card is still at 1 in Advanced current Yu-Gi-Oh! And I feel like that just speaks for itself. The next card I have on here is Union Scramble, and that is because even though XYZ sometimes, isn't always the best deck, this card at 3 is really powerful. Back in my predictions video for the Battle City box, I brought this card up as an honorable mention as to why it shouldn't be in the game, and that is because it basically makes the deck a pendulum deck. Old Yu-Gi-Oh! Before pendulums existed, and more or less Speed Duels as well, is a resource management game. Therefore, when you create a card like this that just gives you 3 monsters for free, and then technically a 4th monster later on a separate turn, you've kind of just thrown advantage and resource management out the window. Pendulums did the same thing, especially before Master Rule 4 and 5, where, you'd gain the advantage by somehow wiping your opponent's board, and the next turn, 1 card top deck gives you everything from their extra deck. They just vomited it all back to the field. And that's not fair, especially in a resource advantage game. Speed Duels, XYZ is like the pendulum deck of the format. It's annoying enough that in XYZ, you blow their board and they can then fuse from the grave. And then after they fuse from the grave, the cards they banished from the field/grave can then come back all in one fatal swoop. That's a little overpowered if you ask me. What I hate more is that people will make the argument that, yeah, well, Jinzo and Nightbeam are 2 excellent cards to deal with this problem. Yeah, but also, as soon as they see either one of those cards, they'll essentially make the bad play and shotgun Scramble on your draw phase and then drop their monsters back to the field, and even though that's considered a bad play, the advantage usually makes up for it. Like, unless you can also wipe their board again and effectively win the game that turn, they can still then fuse from the grave the next turn, and you've essentially just got nothing out of it, and then also they can banish Scramble to get another piece that's banished back to their hand. Like, you've just looped yourself, and that's just not okay. The next one I have is Zoma the Spirit, and Zoma the Spirit is one of those cards that probably just needs to go to 1 for the sake of it, considering the fact that this card does things in this game that it wouldn't normally do if you had 8,000 life points. Because you only have 4,000, depending on where you're attacking this card, you might just lose the game outright to it. And also, you could just lose the game from your opponent attacking one of your monsters with it, which is kind of nuts. Now, Jinzo and Nightbeam once again exist, along with all the other Spell and Trap Hate cards, to deal with this card, but it's still a problem. Like, the sad part is, you have Cosmic Cyclone, you have Twister, you have Jinzo, you have Breaker the Magical Warrior. You have a lot of things that can deal with this, and yet still it becomes a prevalent option. Because 1800 Body, that when dies by battle, inflicts the monster's attack that killed it to your life points, that's a lot. That's just a lot. And when you see this card in almost every deck, and yeah, I understand, not everyone is playing it, and when you see this card in a collective amount of decks that just speaks to extra damage in the game, it really does become an issue, where I think that's just one of those cards that probably should go to 1. Like, you shouldn't be able to flip Zone the Spirit at mid to late point in the game and have to redirect your attack or call back your attack just because by killing it, you lose the game. That's a little too much for something like Speed Duels. On to the semi-limited list. Now, the semi-limits in Speed Duels, I feel like, make more sense than semi-limits in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Semi-limits in advanced format Yu-Gi-Oh! Almost can just either go to 1 or 3 and don't need to exist. Destiny Hero Malicious is probably the only counter-argument I can make to that rule, because at 1 it does nothing, and at 3 it's a little too oppressive, but at 2 it's probably just fine. But if the card ever does become oppressive again, you then put it to 1, just because, you know, it's essentially banning it at that point. At 2, however, in a 20 to 30 card deck, it's more like a playset in a 40 to 60 card deck. The fact that Speed Duels allowed us to have 3 cards from the get-go was actually quite shocking to me, considering if you then add search power to that, your deck is just so consistent. It's nuts to me. So putting a card to 2 in Speed Duels kind of just keeps it in check and, you know, justifies it if it's being played as a 3 of and everything. So keep that in mind when I go through every card in this list, starting with Breaker the Magical Warrior. I don't think this card's oppressive and needs to get hit to 1 like Zoma or Scramble. I just think it's a card that at 2 is a little bit more fair than if it was at 3. At 3, this card is played in almost every single deck. And when a card is played almost at every single deck, you kind of want to justify it by knocking it down a peg. Breaker the Magical Warrior being a 1600 body that either is a 1900 body with its spell counter or 16 and destroys the spell or trap is just so versatile. It's also dark, it makes Allure of Darkness relevant. It also, because it gets spell counters, makes cards like Apprentice Magician more relevant. It just has so much going for it, and because of that, probably should get knocked down to 2. Next on the list, I have Parasite Paranoid. Now, I didn't want to ban Twisted Personality and Inner Conflict and not leave Moth unchecked. Granted, like I said, Parasite Paranoid at 2 is not much different than it at 3, except for you will draw it a little bit less. And I think in 20 to 30 card Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, that's probably justifying the card. You could alternatively ban Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth, as crazy as that sounds, but I don't think the card needs to get banned. The most important part of Parasite Paranoid in Moth is that it drops one of your monsters on your field by taking it and essentially tributing it off. Whatever you summon off of it isn't the problem card. Yes, I understand Perfectly Ultimate is 3,500 and in 4,000, that's almost just game if you have something else to swing with. But let's say you ban that, so everyone goes to Metal Armored Bug. He's still 2,800 and currently still pretty annoying to deal with. And then Parasite Paranoid at 1, I think just kills the deck. I don't think you'd play it if the card was at 1, because you'd have to hard open it. And yeah, you got the skill to shuffle back something and get another draw. It would make you want to play more draw, but you can't justify me playing a Moth deck with one of those. But at 2, I think it's okay. And yeah, you might have to go back to the trap heavy build and play more draw cards like the Koichi, like it used to be played basically. But I think that's okay. And then I have Book of Moon, and Book of Moon fills a similar reason to Breaker. We'll just keep it in check, you know? It's played as a 3 of in everything, and when your card, again, is played as 3 ofs in everything, it's one of those things that you just wanna justify it. It's not oppressive, putting it at 1 wouldn't make sense to me. But just throw it down a little bit. You know, obviously, as you can see here, Sphere Karibo is not on this semi-limited list, and that's another example of a card that I'd argue you'd play 3 of in almost everything. But the difference I have with Sphere is while Sphere can't be hit because it's in the hand unless you have a hand destruction type card, Sphere doesn't change the field. By switching a monster to defense mode, it's different than Book of Moon flipping a monster into face down defense mode. If Jinzo, for example, is on the field and you Sphere that, Jinzo's effects are still live. Where if you Book of Moon a Jinzo, its effects are no longer live and you're not stuck under the you can't play traps rule. Also, by flipping it face down, it makes it more susceptible to cards like Grandmark the Rock Monarch that can just target any set card on the field and destroy it. Sphere can't do that for you. And that's my list, guys. I only have this as my ban list. Now, like I said, if Sphere Karibo, for example, is something you'd also want to see on this list, you gotta wait a few months and then you just throw it on here. But this is a conversation. We can have this conversation in the comments down below. So let me know what you think about my list, if you think I should change anything, if you think any of these aren't justified, and then let's have a conversation about it, shall we? Like, comment, and subscribe as always. Please click that notification bell, and if you found this interesting, like I said, let's have a conversation about it. I personally think the format is okay how it currently is without a ban list, but eventually we'll get to a point where we need either this or Duel Links' setup. So if we were going to implement it now, this is how I would go about doing it. But again, I don't think we live in such an oppressive format where anything needs to get hit. This is just stuff that would justify it. But apparently I'm getting a call, so I'll see you guys in the next video.